everybody, what is up? Cobra here with a brand new review for HBG's new Global War 2025. Now, as you can see, the box is pretty large and takes up a little bit too much space on my review table, but we finally have it. I've been waiting for this game for probably the past year, as many other historical board gaming fans have been also, and it's just crazy to finally see it on my table and in a box too. As you can see, a really nice looking box. You got a little bit of a look at it in the intro sequence, and it's a pretty nicely sized box, as you can see in scale with my hand. Really cool box art, you know, it'll look great on a shelf. But of course, the box is not the only thing you're going to get or the main importance of this game. Now, of course, you also get the associated map, and that is stickered, so I mean, of course, it's not beautiful, but you do get a little labeled holster for your map because it does not fit inside of the actual box. But we will get into what you're going to get in this game and go further into the review of Global War 2025 Meltdown. Alright, so once you crack open the box and remove the packing paper, you will be greeted with the plethora of things that come inside of this game. So first off, of course, the key to playing any game, the rules. It is really great that they included a full-on rulebook with the game, which is awesome. You know, you'll be able to read through this if you don't have it printed out or if you don't want to look at a PDF of it, and it's on nice thick cardstock, so a very nice looking rulebook with the great graphic art on the front. Now, you are also given a bunch of different bags of stuff, you know, no boxes included, which of course most of this is, you know, saving on parts counts, and a lot of board games don't really include boxes anyways. So you're confronted with all the different nations, and you can look to the timestamps below when I review the pieces that you're going to get. But here we've got the Pacific Coalition, the Middle Eastern Caliphate, the good old US of A, China, the NATO forces, and the Russians. In the big bag, you're going to get a lot of player aids, stuff like, or not player aids, but stuff that you're going to be using, more generic pieces, I guess. Stuff like roundels for controlling territories, and then the specific, or the nation-specific ordnance. So you can see here, these are Russian ordnance pieces. So there's a cruise missile, sub-launched ballistic missile. Again, we'll be going into those later on in terms of the pieces. And lastly, this bag, as it's pretty, you know, random in terms of like the pieces thrown into it, this is what I assume Doug, who is the CEO of Historical Board Gaming, this is what I assume is the extra pieces he was talking about. He had mentioned that last minute they ended up tossing in a bunch of extra pieces so that you would not be running out anytime soon, so you wouldn't have any shortages, which is pretty nice. Some other things that you're going to get are these nice coasters. You've got all the different nations, so you know you could put maybe your money on it, your purchases, or just give them to your friends as like drink coasters. So you got China. This is supposed to represent the Pacific Coalition, but it's an Indian flag. Russia, the Caliphate, the US, and NATO. So pretty nice coasters, and they're double-sided, so they've got different nations on the back sides. And then getting into the main ways you're going to be playing the game, these really cool looking player aids. Nothing printed on the back, but they are nice thick cardstock. You may have seen on other YouTubers' channels, they have, or some of the YouTubers that got these early access versions of this game, their player aids were made of paper, but the one that you'll be getting if you order this is a cardstock, which is nice. It's going to hold up well. And these are just, I think, so helpful. The fact that you have everything you're going to need to, you know, look at rules in terms of how units work and how much it is to buy them. You've got the turn sequence. You've got how to conduct special abilities. You have your arsenals of missiles, and even stuff like place units boxes and areas that you could place like your IPCs. So a great addition to the game. It'll really help a lot of new players and just players keep up with the game because it is pretty fast-paced. So you get one of those for every single nation. Getting into the other player aids, we have the technology chart. I won't be going into how to play the game, but this is the chart if you wanted to take a look at it. And be sure to comment down below if you do want to see some videos on how to play this game. Next, we have some setup charts. So here we've got the Caliphate setup. And on the back side, let's see. This is some more technology breakthroughs. Oh, these are like player aids. So you've got just generic tech, how to conduct cyber warfare, different versions of the, or the rules for different nuclear weapons, since nuclear ordnance is an optional rule. But, I mean, why wouldn't you want to play with nukes in this game? And we have setups for everybody, and it looks like on the back side of all of the setup charts are just generic rules for the game. So you can hand these out to your players once they're done setting up their pieces, and they will be able to easily have something to refer to. And I just love the detail in the artwork. It just looks very nice overall. They had some great design directions when making this game. Here we have the turn chart. So we've got, the different years from January of 2025 up until July of 2030. And I'm sure you could play this game longer, although it is designed to have a set amount of turns. And you can see the tech, or the industrial chart goes up pretty high, all the way up to 84. You can see the premier nation is America with 38, and they would have to almost double their income to get all the way up to the top. So, of course, this is a smaller game, so there's less income. We don't need this to go up into the hundreds, although we will find out. I'll be definitely putting out some more reviews for gameplay in later editions. And you get 2 battle boards, which is really nice for attacker and defender. And as you can see here, we have the attacker on the front and defender on the back, which is awesome. And the fact that you get 2 of them is pretty nice. The fact you won't have to keep turning this thing upside down over and over again. Try to get the glare off of that and it in frame. But this is a 12-sided die game, but don't worry, you're not going to have to worry about as many units as something like Global 36. And you can see here kind of the generic units that you'll be seeing in the game, from infantry to airborne, ordnance like cruise missiles, attack subs, helicopters, frigates, fighters, MBTs, and guided missile destroyers. And then we've got some other little things that have to do or help you out when you're having your battles, stuff like the symbol that represents target selection and first strike. So very nice player aids overall. Again, they're all made in cardstock, so they will hold up well. And let's not bore you with looking at a bunch of cardstock images. What you guys want to definitely see are these pieces. So let's get into what you'll be getting in this game. Right, so I thought we could start out with the plastic that you'll be getting in this game. Of course, these aren't all the pieces for every single nation. There are plenty included, but I thought we could just go into the different sculpts you'll be getting in the game and a look closer at all the different factions. Now, these ships do have, names on the bottoms of most of them, so you can see here, this is the tanker carrier, the super carrier for the Caliphate. I won't be going into all the different names. I think that further down the road, I'm going to be doing reviews of all the different nations, including some modifications I'll make to them down the road. So, of course, you'll have to pick up the game or just look up these different units if you really want to, learn about them. But this is a fake unit. Of course, no Middle Eastern nation has completed a supercarrier yet, but this was a great idea by the design team to make a supercarrier built out of a tanker ship. So you can see there's the bridge in the back, and a very cool looking unit. Definitely not out of the ordinary considering the Iranian carrier projects of turning some of their tankers into carriers. Here we have an Egyptian, the Mistral class, Egyptian LVT or LHT landing helicopter dock. These things are basically your transports in the game. Very cool looking unit. And overall, all these units are really awesome, but especially these Caliphate units. This is the guided missile destroyer. Because the Caliphate was a neat option, because as you may have noticed, not all the nations have different sculpts They share a lot of pieces between factions. This is the intermediate-sized frigate, a lot smaller than all the pieces. I really like what they did with the naval ships, as you can see, where they have quite a size difference between all of them, so you can easily tell them apart on the board. Here is the submarine. Let's see what this is. The Fateh class submarine. I swear that by the time that I've got these nations all painted up, I'll be able to pronounce all their different names. We got a pretty cool looking irregular soldier for the Caliphate. No helmet on him. He's got like an AK-47, or actually looks like a I forget the name of that. It's like the AK-47 with a drum magazine. Very cool looking piece. But as I was saying before, a lot of the nations share different sculpts, except for the Caliphate, who is all 3D printed and custom, so you know they are completely different from all the other factions in the game, which I really like. And the reason they did that, or Historical Board Gaming did that, is because they couldn't see, you know, the Middle Eastern faction or the Middle Eastern Caliphate, you know, being stacked with, you know, modern Chinese MBTs and super carriers. And this one's really nice. This is the Karar main battle tank that Iran had unveiled a couple years ago. But you can see it's got the really cool looking blow-up panels. Black was a decent choice. You know, all these Middle Eastern pieces are spray painted, or at least, you know, painted, so that they aren't just raw 3D printer plastic. Black was decent, but I would have chosen maybe like a dark gray, kind of like World War II German pieces. It would have helped bring out the detail a little bit better. Next we have the Chinese. Now I won't be going into every single nation you see here, so we've got the Chinese, which are shared between the Russians, and then the American, all the Western Pact nations. So the Americans, the Pacific Coalition, and the NATO forces are all shared. So I'll just go over the Americans to show you those pieces. But first off, we have the Chinese. This is the Chinese super carrier. I'm pretty sure this is the 00 class carrier, which is being constructed. Very nice looking piece. I really like how big these super carriers are. Next up, we have the Chinese LHT. Again, a landing craft, your new 2025 transport, basically. Another cool looking sculpt. The guided missile destroyer. And I guess going over different units a little bit, the guided missile destroyer will be your main kind of ordnance firing warship. They're kind of like your battleships of the modern age, with intermediate class frigates being more of your destroyers, and of course submarines being submarines as always. Although these new attack submarines of 2025 are going to be a pain to try to take out. They have different assets they can use, like silent running mode, and plenty of different ways to escape your attacks, basically. I really like the Chinese PLA soldier. It's it looks a lot like the reality of what they're using. Here we have a Chinese fighter jet. Sorry about my cracked hands. It is winter right now, so the air is dry and cold. The attack helicopter. I really like the attack helicopter for the Chinese. I don't know, more rotors equals more cool in my eyes, so yeah, pretty cool looking unit. And lastly, for the Chinese, or the Eastern Pact nations, we have the Chinese MBT. I forget the model of this thing. It's, I think, an experimental model, but pretty cool looking tank. And like I said, the Russians are the same, or share the same sculpts, just in a different color. So getting into the Americans, we have the American supercarrier, the Ford class, or I think it's the Gerald Ford class. They shortened it to Ford class, but a huge ship, very nice. I really love all this little like chiseled in detail for the elevators and what are those called? The magnetic, I think it's electromagnetic catapults for the fighters that this thing is using. Here we have the landing helicopter dock. I really like the detailing on the superstructure. It's very detailed and nice looking. Nothing on the deck, and of course we have, I guess this is the America class. Here we have the guided missile destroyer. I definitely like this sculpt more than the Chinese. It just has a little bit more, detailing. The Ali Burke class. So, yeah, definitely a little bit more detail. Of course, the Arleigh Burke is a older model, so doesn't have all the fancy, clean lines of the stealth technology that the Chinese are using on theirs. Although, speaking of stealth technology, we have the Allied, or the American, intermediate class frigate. This is the Independence class littoral warship, and pretty cool looking ship. This thing's definitely an interesting looking warship, and I really like the addition that, so in real life this thing is a trimaran, so it's got one hull and then two off the side, and it's a trimaran. They could have easily filled in all of this, but just for the little bit of realism, they added the three pontoons. And lastly, we have the American attack sub. This is the Virginia class. As submarines go, it's not a very detailed ship, but this sculpt is pretty, barren. But of course, like I said, you can't really make it look more detailed if the actual ship isn't detailed. Now here we have the American infantry, and of course the Western Pact infantry, considering that they don't have individual sculpts. And this guy is a lot different than the other people that you see, or the other factions, as you can easily tell from the backside. This guy is wearing like a sort of exosuit. I think the Americans right now, their exosuit project is called the Iron Man, and he's got a nice big like M4 machine gun, or not M4, but I don't know my modern weapon names, but nice light machine gun or infantry support weapon. Yeah, the choice of going with an exosuit was definitely a bold one, considering that, the progression of, what we're working with in the modern age of trying to develop and research stuff like that. But I think it's a pretty neat thing. And of course, this game is kind of like the future, or like the near future of warfare. So, of course, you may not think that the Middle East will have super carriers in 4 more years, but at the same time, once those 4 years come around and we're living the reality of 2025, you could always say, like, this is going to be 2045. You just keep pushing it off until, hopefully, but the actual World War III happens. Here we have I think this is the F-35 fighter jet. I gotta read up on my modern weapons literature, and of course the Honorable Apache attack helicopter, one of the most recognizable helicopters, and the long-awaited M1 Abrams main battle tank. This is probably another one of the most recognizable tanks in the world, and the detail that they got on this thing is really nice. You can see the blow-up panels, the turret on top, little commander's cupola, and you can see along that seam on the bottom that this is a two-piece design, so it allows for more detailing in the mold. But very awesome looking unit. And as I stated before, the different nations of the Western Alliance are all the same, and the Chinese and Russians share a same sculpt. So overall, I think I'll just do thoughts on the pieces. I think positives are that detail-wise, these are amazing. They're unlike anything that you're going to get in a normal Axis and Allies style game. Historical Board Gaming does a really great job at detailing their pieces to the max, using 2-part molds and just using a lot of detailed molds when it comes to just 1-part pieces, like we saw with the carrier decks, having those chiseled in details, and just really nice looking infantry pieces. Now, my criticisms, So you got one minor one before, which is just a little harp on the color scheme of the Caliphate. I guess another criticism would be definitely the elephant in the room, that you don't get individual units for the different nations. Now, of course, a lot of things are shared in reality, like I think of especially the Pacific Coalition and NATO, you know, the Western allies. They do share a lot of equipment, but, you know, as somebody that may live in Europe, you know, the fact that you're not going to be seeing, you know, the Leopard or the Challenger, and the fact that your supercarrier is an American carrier rather than, you know, the British or French supercarriers. So that is a little bit of a kind of niche thing. You know, you're going to be able to play the game easily with all of the pieces that you get. And of course, you know, if you're not a weapons expert or, you know, read up on the news, you don't know what, you know, a Indian supercarrier would look like. So, you know, to your players that aren't especially into this game, they won't, you know, find any criticisms with it. But that is definitely one thing that I really, especially I think the Russians are probably the biggest example of something that I really wish that they had had a specific Russian molded pieces. You know, stuff like the, what is it, the Su-25 Foxbat, something like that would have been a really cool looking fighter. Or the Hind attack transport helicopter. And for those of you that may be up to date with video games and playing Battlefield 2042, seeing the Russian Armada heavy tank, which is being trialed and run in some prototyping nowadays, it's easy to see that those things could be introduced. I guess when we see the dedication that went into redesigning the Middle Eastern Caliphate to have, you know, nice new weapons that look all, I guess, pertain to the different countries that make up that nation, and then to see a little bit of a lackluster lineup of similar faction units, it does kind of stink. But like I said, it's definitely a niche thing. If you pick up Axis and Allies games, you know, they're sharing pieces all the time. So seeing a couple shared nations in a world where a lot of units and weapon systems are shared, it's definitely not the biggest complaint ever. Also, one last little bonus thing that I like is that the Middle Eastern faction, a lot of people have been critical of them using 3D prints, and I haven't always been the biggest fan of 3D prints because, as many people know, they are a little bit brittle, but the fact that they are printed and also painted, they are very resilient. You know, you're not going to be snapping off barrels anytime soon with them. So overall, really great set of units, and I think you guys are going to enjoy them a lot too. So let's get into the plastic markers that you're going to be getting in the game. Alright, and here we have the Ordnance pieces and generic markers that you'll be receiving in this set. Now, again, like I said, you get bags that are full of these things, but these are just the kind of generic ones that I wanted to show off. Now, you can see that I have them arranged in rows, so here are the roundels that you'll get for taking territories. We have nuclear cruise missiles here, ICBMs, which are intercontinental ballistic missiles. And again, like I said, as you can see, a few factions don't receive these, and that's not that they're missing, it's that the factions themselves don't actually possess those weapons. So you can see here that the Pacific Coalition and NATO do not have intercontinental ballistic missiles. Here we have IRBMs, which are intermediate range ballistic missiles. You can see that Russia and NATO does not possess those. Here we have the drone markers. Drones are basically an air unit that doesn't have any combat value. It's basically a piece that modifies your actual combat units, and that's why it's a marker, because it's more of kind of like an ordnance or an assist unit. These are cyber warfare markers. All these markers basically are things that you can put chips underneath to represent how much you have. So with say you have 4 cruise missiles, you'd put 4 chips under the cruise missile marker, and that shows that you have 4. Kind of stinks that you don't actually get enough to actually represent that, you know, like 4 cruise missile markers, but that would make the game probably like $100 more expensive. These chips are one of the most expensive pieces that HBG offers, so I can definitely understand that decision. And then you can see we have an assortment of nuclear ballistic missile submarines, and the Caliphate does not. They're the only faction that don't possess that technology, so they don't get those units. And so though these submarines are actual kind of units that can be attacked, they can't attack anything, and they're basically only used to fire their missiles, and once that happens, they're out of play. They get taken off the board. So they act very much like Ordnance, so that's one reason that they are actual markers. Another reason was that HBG had said that these pieces were too big to actually put in molds, so they ended up not actually including them in the game, which I think mainly for the fact that they're Ordnance. I think that that is a decent choice to just have them be actual markers. And then off to the side here we have some special markers, which you can see the Russians have the nuclear torpedo. They only get one of these, and that's basically because that's a Russian special ability, and to build a nuclear torpedo, and once it's used, that's it. It's a one-use weapon. And lastly, we have the anti-ship ballistic missile, which is another piece that the Chinese get, or another special ability that the Chinese have, which is basically firing that thing off at incoming American ships at the coastline. And the cool thing about that is that they actually get to build that unit, so, and use it a lot, so they can use it as a coastal defense weapon basically, whereas the nuclear torpedo is like a one and done type deal. And one thing I forgot to note was another unit that the Americans get to possess, even though it's in controlled Israel, and this is the atomic demolitions munition. And this represents like nuclear facilities and landmines that are placed in Israel, and it's a one-use weapon in the fact that when an attacking player attacks, so let's say the Caliphate attacks Israel, Israel can basically blow itself up and try to take out as many attackers as possible. It doesn't damage friendly units, but it is a nice little addition that helps defend Israel. Not sure if the people of Israel would really like something like that happening, but it is there nonetheless for you to control and you to decide. Up top we have a few generic markers. You only get one of these. This is just the turn marker that shows you where you are. I showed before the turn track. Here we have the airborne marker. I really like these things. I bought some more because basically in the game airbornes are a special infantry that you buy, and you would just place an infantry on top, or I guess you could just use the marker. But I'll be gluing some of my infantry to those so that I have special units for them. Next up we have nuclear blast markers. These are placed in territories that have been bombed by nukes. Damage markers for damaging facilities. And finally silent running, which is a special submarine token that you can use to hide your submarines, and pretty nice little decal on this where you've got the submarine and destroyer looking around for it. So lots of markers that you'll be getting in this game, and like I said, I guess my one criticism is that you don't get enough to, you have to chip these off, but to that, I guess the positive is that you didn't get that option because of the fact that it would have increased the cost of the game significantly. So overall, I like all these markers. They have pretty cool graphics and not many complaints on them. Alright, and now we will be getting into probably what most of you have been waiting for, the map. So let's get that set up and show you guys in a bit. Alright everybody, as you can see I've partially set up the map here, and it is a pretty decent size. Now I showed you the box before, and here's the map. It is about 2 feet by 4 feet, I would say, so a little bit longer than your average 1940 game, or 1941 game. So, but definitely smaller than something like Global 36 or Global 40. So, as you can see, I have partially set up some units here. So, here we have the American setup. And for those of you wondering, now of course this game doesn't come with chips. You can almost set up this game completely without chips, at least with the Americans, as I've found. So you can see the various American holdouts across the world, including these blow-up boxes over here. And so if you want to set the game up without chips, you're going to be short 2 US infantry, but of course they do suggest that you buy those or have some on the side, which most players do. That was another feature that people did complain about, but the majority of players had voiced their opinion, saying that they already, had chips and they didn't really need any more coming from another game, which would also increase the cost for those of you that want a slightly cheaper game from what this game did end up costing. Here you can see we've got the quite expansive US Pacific forces. Of course, you don't get any of the other setups right now. I will be making future videos on those. One thing I definitely do like about the pieces, another little tidbit, is the fact that the carriers are, pretty large, as you can see there, so stuff like the fighters and helicopters sit on them pretty well without having to be magnetized. And here we've got an example of an airborne up there in Alaska, where you just can place an infantry on top of an airborne ship, and of course they just provide you with a bunch of chips so that you don't have to have more units to mess around with. Overall, I really like the map's art style. The kind of satellite view of the world is pretty neat. It reminds me of games like, I think it's Meltdown, which is a computer game. It shows you kind of like this 80s style satellite view where everybody competes to capture territory and establish nuclear base. So overall, I like that aspect of the game. I guess other little things that I like about the map design, and I guess this gets into some of the ways the game is played. One thing I definitely like is the addition of being able to add certain units and effects to those units before the game actually starts. So I showed you the silent running ships beforehand, so you can actually, any player can begin their game with their attack submarines on silent running mode, which I haven't explained completely, but that basically negates their ability to attack or be attacked, so it kind of hides them from enemy ships. That would help in areas over here near the Caliphate, where we've got this trapped US fleet. If they don't want to lose this sub, maybe they want to put it on silent running to hide it from any sort of aerial attack from the Caliphate. Another thing that I like is the drones are another unit that I don't know about each faction. I know that the US, it does say that they get 4 drones to place anywhere in any of their controlled territories at the beginning of the game. And then the last kind of placeable unit is the ballistic missile subs, which can be put anywhere. And as I explained before, they kind of are like an ordnance unit, so even though they move like an actual plastic piece, once they fire their main missile, they are pretty much taken out of play. They can be hunted though, so you wouldn't want to put this right off, say, the Chinese coast, because the Chinese are going to want to send submarines to try to attack them. Another thing that I like is the addition of narrow straits, I believe they're called. Don't quote me on that. But you can really see it down here in Southeast Asia, where they've basically decided that certain areas where in reality, these land masses would be very close and easily controlled by stuff like mines and artillery, they've made them a special type of naval passage where if a faction controls both ends, it blocks the passage of warships. And you can see here that Southeast Asia has a ton of them. Basically, whoever controls the Indonesian islands can basically block off ships coming in and out of the Indian Ocean. And a good starting example is down here with the US fleet that's currently trapped in Caliphate territory, where the Suez Canal is kind of working like your normal canal, blocking their passage into the Mediterranean. And down here, since the Caliphate controls Somaliland and the Central Caliphate, kind of Arabian Peninsula, it blocks that territory. And since the US doesn't have, naval units to try to take out these territories, they can't get through that passage until either something happens on either end. So that's definitely a cool addition to the game, and I like the addition of the fleet down here because it kind of is a predicament for the US that they have to deal with, having a whole capital fleet stuck in enemy territory. Speaking of stuck in enemy territory, the dynamic of Israel is pretty awesome, where you've got Israel, which has likely, maybe in the opening stages of this Third World War, taken down to the Red Sea. So they are now cutting the Caliphate in half, and in the nice blow-up boxes, which are a great addition, you can see all their units fit in there pretty nicely, and they are definitely stacked when it comes to nuclear weapons. They have some intermediate range ballistic missiles just in case they want to fire some off, or the Caliphate maybe decides to start a nuclear war beforehand. And they also have that atomic demolitions munition, so they can kind of blow up the tracks of the Caliphate trying to take out the Israeli nation. And that's definitely going to be something that the Caliphate's going to want to pull off, because Israel does cut their territory in half. So one thing that I do like, but wasn't really used, I don't know if they meant to maybe add them in the rules, but you can see that mountains have been added to many of the territories in the game, but there isn't any rules on using them, so that's definitely something you could house rule in, but I thought it was a little strange that the rules didn't include maybe just an optional mountain rule, just in case, to add some more diversity to the game. Printed on naval bases, as you can see, pretty nice addition. It helps players keep the cost down because you don't have to have your own naval base pieces, and the fact that they're printed and you can't build them or completely destroy facilities, so bases like air bases and naval bases, it's nice that they're just printed there. You don't have to worry about missing them in a setup. Another thing I like about the map is the thought out way of laying out different territories, so it really helps new players and just players alike all see the worth of territories. So you get the roundel and the name showing you who controls it. You have any base markers pretty close to the roundel, and the air base markers are different for the different factions, so that's kind of cool. You get the victory point, so basically that just tells you that this is a victory city, affecting who wins the game, so it easily can show, say, the Russians that Germany, France, and England are all important territories to take. This red marker represents the monetary value, the IPP you'll get out of it, plus the amount of infantry you can put in. And the green gear represents the industrial capacity. There's no factories, there's just these capacity points, and that's how you build units like tanks, aircraft, and with an associated C-zone ships. And infantry, say France had, or the NATO faction wanted to build 6 infantry, they would use 5 of those points for infantry and 1 of the mechanical points or industrial points for the last one, meaning they could only build 2 tanks per se. So overall, I really like these features of the map, and I guess a little bit of the player aid. You can see this one's a little bit of a mess, but you've got different areas to place your missile arsenal, with the US starting with a ton of cruise missiles. Cyber warfare points, and yeah, we kind of went over that, but just to show you what it looks like when you might have some pieces thrown about on it. The victory points, you would normally have 2, so something representing the Eastern Pact like the Russian or Chinese roundel. And basically, if you're capturing victory cities, you're going up, but also if you're using nukes, you're going down. So you can automatically lose and automatically win, so that's kind of a cool dynamic back and forth. So I just wanted to get into some of my criticisms of the map. There definitely isn't a lot, but art style overall I like. I think the only main complaints, or I suppose one that had to do with the art style, was I was never a fan of having all of these neutral states be completely white. I kind of like with Global War 1936, the different neutrals have different colors, but I can see with this game wanting to be more streamlined and easy,
them just wanting them to be white, because it just kind of is a blanket like term that anything white you see is a neutral nation. But I think that maybe, I don't know, a different color choice, or maybe something that contrasts with like these lines, because the territory lines can get a little hidden, as you can see, with some of the territories. So overall, that was one little gripe that I had with the art style, but isn't a huge deal breaker for me. And then the other thing just had to get into the gameplay, so little things here and there that I didn't like. So first off, I do like neutrals a lot, like just, you know, representation of all nations. And some of the setups were a little bit on the kind of more gameplay oriented side. So, you know, areas like Cuba, not having units or IPCs to be able to build units, although that kind of makes sense that as the Cuban regime isn't that popular, so, you know, they might not be able to gain a lot of support. But the fact that there's no standing army in Cuba is kind of a little iffy. But I will have some customizations coming out in the near future, so be sure to check that out, because in terms of gameplay, you know, if you want to set up the neutrals a little differently, that's, you know, something you can easily house rule in. So next up was something that I wanted to see in Europe but didn't actually get to see. So I really liked the dynamic of having Israel being this little holdout of the American aligned sphere of influence, being surrounded by the Eastern Pact. And so something that I wanted to see when I kind of first saw the gameplay of this game was a Kaliningrad, which would be somewhere around here. And of course, with the story or whatever that they've built up, likely being that Russia has expanded, you know, they've taken out the Baltic states, they've taken out Ukraine, and maybe Belarus has joined the Russians. So basically we're seeing kind of a next couple years of Russian expansion, and then finally the overflow into Europe and the Third World War that is associated with it. But an idea that I thought would be pretty cool is something like Kaliningrad being in this area here, being a Russian territory, because it is a very militarized and important territory, as it's like an enclave for the Russians. And then they could have a NATO-aligned Baltic states, and so basically it would provide a cool dynamic of having NATO being, having forces up here that they might want to try to defend or reinforce, but having Kaliningrad blocking it, and at the same time the Russians would want to try to break out of Kaliningrad, maybe cut off the trapped Baltic states units. But again, a minor little gameplay design, and definitely wouldn't make a huge effect in the overall grand scheme of the game. So those are my little thoughts and criticisms and review of the map. It doesn't show up too well, as you can see, with this expanded out view, but when I give you little zoom-ins, you can definitely see the way the colors come out and all that. So a very nice map. You can see the size is also great. Even though it's a smaller map, it's a smaller scale game. So the units, you know, the US fleets, which are some of the largest, fit in the sea zones. Territories like you can see in the United States, I haven't shipped off anything, but they all fit with space for more units. So overall, a really successful execution of a board game, and I will definitely have to play this game in the near future and show you guys some of the modifications and the gameplay that is associated with this game. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Cobra out.